Thomas McKenna sat at his wooden kitchen table. The oil lamp gave off a weak yellow light. Outside his cabin, the Wyoming wind howled across the empty land. It was a cold February night in 1887. Snow covered everything as far as he could see. He held a pencil in his rough hands. A piece of paper lay in front of him. He had been trying to write the same letter for 3 hours. The words would not come easy. Thomas was 32 years old. He had lived alone on his ranch for 3 years now. His nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away. Sometimes he did not talk to another person for weeks. The silence was getting to him. He looked around his cabin. It was clean but empty. He had built it himself with thick logs. The roof was strong. The walls kept out the cold. But it felt more like a shelter than a home. There were no curtains on the windows, no flowers on the table, no warm smell of bread, baking. Thomas had come to Wyoming after the war. He bought land when it was cheap. He worked hard every day. His cattle herd had grown from 20 head to over 200. He had money in the bank now. But what good was success if you had no one to share it with? He started writing again. The pencil scratched against the rough paper. Wanted. A good woman for marriage. I am a cattle rancher in Wyoming Territory. I own 640 acres of good grazing land. I have a comfortable cabin and a growing herd of cattle. I am looking for an honest, hard-working woman who wants to build a life in the West. Thomas stopped writing. He read the words again. They sounded too cold, too much like a business deal. He crumpled up the paper and threw it in the fire. He tried again. Lonely rancher seeks wife. I am 32 years old and own a successful cattle ranch near Cheyenne, Wyoming. I can provide a good home and a secure future. I am looking for a woman who wants adventure and is not afraid of hard work. Must be of good character. Still not right. Thomas rubbed his beard. How do you ask a stranger to marry you? How do you explain why a man would live alone for so long? The truth was simple. Thomas was shy around women. He had been to dances in Cheyenne a few times, but the young ladies there seemed to want men who could talk fancy and dress in fine clothes. Thomas wore the same work clothes every day. His hands were always dirty from ranch work. He was more comfortable with horses than with people. He thought about his parents back in Ohio. His mother had been writing letters. She wanted him to come home and find a wife there. But Thomas loved Wyoming. He loved the big sky and the endless land. He loved watching his cattle grow fat on the prairie grass. He just wanted someone to love it with him. Thomas started writing a third time. Dear lady, my name is Thomas McKenna. I own a cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory, about 20 miles outside of Cheyenne. I am writing to ask if you might consider marriage to a man you have never met. He paused. This was better. More honest. I know this may sound strange, but I have heard that many good women back east are looking for new opportunities. Life here is different from city life. It can be hard sometimes. The winters are long and cold. The nearest town is far away. But the land is beautiful. There is room to grow and build something lasting. Thomas got up and poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. The cabin was so quiet, he could hear the clock ticking on the wall. He sat back down and kept writing. I can offer you a good home. My cabin has 3 rooms and a stone fireplace. I have money saved and my cattle business is doing well. I do not drink or gamble. I go to church when the traveling preacher comes through. I am told I am a fair man, though I admit I am not much for fancy conversation. He thought about what else a woman might want to know. I am 6 feet tall with brown hair and a beard. I have all my teeth, and I am in good health. I can read and write, though I never had much schooling. I built everything on this ranch with my own hands. I am looking for a woman who is not afraid of hard work, and who wants to build a life together. Thomas set down his pencil. He read over what he had written so far. It was honest, at least. Maybe too honest. Would any woman want to marry a man who lives so far from civilization? He thought about the cattle drive he'd been on last summer. In Kansas, he had met other ranchers. Some of them had mail-order brides. The men talked about how their wives had changed their lives. They had someone to cook for them, to mend their clothes, to talk to in the evenings. Most importantly, they had someone who cared if they came home safe each night. Thomas picked up his pencil again. If you are interested in this life, please, write to me. I will answer any questions you have honestly. If we decide we suit each other, I will send money for train fare to Cheyenne. We can meet and see if we want to marry. He signed his name at the bottom. Then he wrote his address. Thomas McKenna, McKenna Ranch, Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory. The next morning, Thomas rode into town. Cheyenne was growing fast. The railroad had brought many new people. There were shops and hotels now. Even a newspaper office. Thomas tied his horse to the post outside the newspaper building. Inside, a man with ink-stained fingers looked up from his desk. "What can I do for you?" the man asked. "I want to put an advertisement in some Eastern newspapers," Thomas said. "How much would that cost?" The newspaper man explained how it worked. For $50, he could send Thomas's advertisement to newspapers in Chicago, New York, and Boston. It would run for 1 month. $50 was a lot of money. But Thomas had been saving for 3 years. He handed over the cash. "What kind of advertisement?" the man asked. Thomas gave him the letter. The newspaper man read it and nodded. "You are not the first," he said. "Many men out here are looking for wives. Many women back east are looking for new starts. It often works out well." Thomas felt better hearing this. Maybe he was not crazy after all. "How long before I might get answers?" Thomas asked. "Give it 6 weeks," the man said. "Maybe 8. Mail takes time." Thomas rode home feeling nervous and excited. He had done it. Now he just had to wait. For the next 2 months, Thomas checked his mail every few days. The post office was in town, so it meant a long ride each time. But he was too anxious to wait longer. Finally, in late April, the postmaster handed him 3 letters. Thomas's heart pounded as he rode home. 3 women had answered his advertisement. 3 women were willing to consider marrying him. That night, by lamplight, Thomas read each letter carefully. One woman sounded nice but seemed scared, of ranch life. Another asked too many questions about his money. But the third letter was different. It was from a woman named Eleanor Hartford in Chicago. Her handwriting was neat and elegant. She wrote about wanting adventure and a fresh start. She said she had been a school teacher but was tired of city life. She wanted to see the West and help build something new. Thomas read her letter 3 times. This woman sounded perfect. Smart but not proud. Adventurous but sensible. Best of all, she seemed to understand what life on a ranch would be like. Thomas got out fresh paper and started writing back to Eleanor Hartford. He did not know that. Eleanor was not her real name. He did not know about her real life in Chicago. He only knew that for the first time in years he felt hopeful about the future. Eva Hartwell stared at the newspaper in her hands. Her real name was Evangeline, but everyone called her Eva. She sat in her small room above Madame Claire's establishment in Chicago. The room was fancy with silk curtains and a soft bed, but it felt like a prison. Eva was 26 years old. She had been working at Madame Claire's for 4 years now. It was not the life she had planned. It was not the life any young girl dreams of. She came from a good family once. Her father owned a successful dry goods store. Eva went to school and learned to read and write well. She could speak French and play piano. Her family had plans for her to marry a banker's son. Then everything fell apart. In 1873, when Eva was 18, banks started failing across the country. People called it the Panic of 1873. Her father's business collapsed overnight. He owed money to everyone. The family lost their house, their store, everything. Eva's father became sick with worry. He died of a heart attack 6 months later. Her mother could not handle the shame and grief. She took too much laudanum one night and never woke up. Eva found herself alone in the world with no money and no family. At first, Eva tried to find honest work. She looked for jobs as a governess or teacher. But times were hard. Many families had no money to pay servants or teachers. The jobs that existed paid almost nothing. Eva got desperate. She heard about Madame Claire's from another girl who had nowhere else to go. Madame Claire ran a high-class establishment. The girls there entertained wealthy men. They were well-dressed and well-fed. It was not respectable work, but it was better than starving on the streets. Eva told herself it would be temporary, just until she could save enough money to start over somewhere else. But 4 years had passed. She had saved some money, but not enough. And every day that passed made it harder to imagine a different life. Now Eva held the Chicago Tribune in her hands. She had been reading the advertisements in the back pages. Men from the West were looking for wives, cowboys and farmers and ranchers who needed women to share their lives. One advertisement caught her eye. It was from a man named Thomas McKenna in Wyoming. He owned a cattle ranch. He sounded honest and kind in his letter. He was not asking for a beautiful woman or a rich woman. He just wanted someone who would work hard and build a life with him. Eva read the advertisement 3 times. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She went to her writing desk and took out paper and ink, but she did not write as Eva Hartwell. That name was known in certain circles in Chicago. Instead, she created a new person. She would be Eleanor Hartford. Eleanor had been her grandmother's name. It sounded respectable and proper. Eleanor would be a schoolteacher who was tired of city life, someone who wanted adventure and a fresh start in the West. Eva began writing carefully. She had to make Eleanor seem real and believable. Dear Mr. McKenna, I read your advertisement in the Chicago Tribune with great interest. My name is Eleanor Hartford. I am 24 years old and have been working as a schoolteacher here in Chicago for the past 5 years. Eva paused. She was actually 26, but 24 sounded better. And she had to be careful about her past. She needed a story that would explain why a respectable woman would answer a stranger's advertisement. I find myself longing for a different kind of life. The city has become crowded and dirty. I dream of wide-open spaces and clean air. I have always been drawn to stories of the frontier and the brave people who are building new lives there. This was partly true. Eva did dream of escaping the city. She did want to start over somewhere far away from her current life. I am educated and can read and write well. I am told I am a good cook, though I admit I have only cooked for myself and a few students. I am not afraid of hard work. I grew up helping my mother with household tasks before I became a teacher. Eva had to be careful here. She did know how to cook and clean. Madame Claire made sure all her girls had proper skills. But Eva's hands were soft from her current life. She would have to toughen them up if she really went through with this plan. I have some savings put aside so I would not be a burden to you financially. I am in good health and have a cheerful disposition. I believe strongly in the importance of family and home. Eva stopped writing and looked around her room. On the dresser sat bottles of expensive perfume and jewelry given to her by clients. The closet held silk dresses that cost more than most people made in a month. But none of it belonged to Eleanor Hartford. Eleanor would need different clothes. Simple dresses that a schoolteacher might wear. A small trunk with modest belongings. Eva would have to sell most of her things to create this new identity. She continued writing. I must be honest with you, Mr. McKenna. I have never been married, though I was engaged once to a young man who died in an accident. Perhaps that is why I find myself drawn to the idea of a fresh start in a new place. This lie came easily. It would explain why Eleanor was still unmarried at 24. It would also make her seem more respectable and sympathetic. If you are interested in corresponding with me, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. I understand that ranch life would be very different from what I am used to, but I believe I could adapt and even thrive in such an environment. Eva signed the letter Eleanor Hartford and wrote a return address. She rented a small box at a different post office across town. Eleanor's mail would go there, separate from Eva's life at Madame Claire's. The next day, Eva mailed the letter. Then she began the careful work of creating Eleanor's life. She bought simple dresses from a shop that served working women. She purchased a small trunk and filled it with the kind of things a schoolteacher might own. Plain underclothes, a worn Bible, a few modest books. Eva also began changing her appearance. She stopped using rouge and powder. She let her skin return to its natural pale color. She practiced speaking differently, more simply and directly. Eleanor would not have the polish and sophistication that Ava had learned at Madame Claire's. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at Eleanor's post office box. Ava's heart pounded as she opened it. Thomas McKenna had written back. His letter was warm and friendly. He asked about her family and her teaching experience. He told her more about his ranch and life in Wyoming. Ava spent hours crafting Eleanor's response. She created stories about teaching children and living with an elderly aunt who had recently died. She asked thoughtful questions about ranch animals and frontier life. For 3 months, Ava and Thomas exchanged letters. With each letter, Ava fell deeper into the role of Eleanor. She began to believe in this other life she was creating. Thomas seemed like a genuinely good man. He was honest about the hardships of ranch life, but also enthusiastic about the possibilities. In his letters, Thomas wrote about building a future together. He talked about expanding the ranch and maybe having children someday. He described the beauty of the Wyoming landscape and the satisfaction of working the land. Ava found herself truly wanting this life, not just as an escape from her current situation, but as something real and good. For the first time in years, she could imagine being truly happy. In July, Thomas wrote the letter Ava had been hoping for. He asked her to marry him. He said he would send money for train fare to Cheyenne. They could meet and be married by the local preacher. Ava held the letter with shaking hands. This was it. Her chance to leave everything behind and become someone new. Someone clean and respectable and loved. She wrote back immediately, accepting his proposal. Thomas sent $50 for the train fare and expenses, more money than Ava had seen at one time in months. Ava told Madame Claire she was leaving Chicago to care for a sick relative. It was not unusual for girls to leave suddenly. Madame Claire did not ask too many questions. On a warm August morning, Ava packed Eleanor's small trunk. She took one last look around her fancy room. Then she walked out of Madame Claire's establishment forever. At the train station, Ava bought a ticket to Cheyenne, Wyoming. As the train pulled away from Chicago, she felt like she was leaving her old life behind completely. Eva Hartwell was disappearing. Eleanor Hartford was going to meet her future husband. Eva did not let herself think about what would happen if Thomas discovered the truth. She focused only on the new life waiting for her in Wyoming. A life where she could be the person she had always wanted to be. The train whistle screamed as the Union Pacific pulled into Cheyenne Station. Ava's stomach felt tight with nerves. She had been traveling for 3 days. Her simple brown dress was wrinkled and dusty. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She felt nothing like the elegant woman she had been in Chicago. Through the train window, Eva could see the platform. Men in cowboy hats and work clothes waited for passengers. Women in simple dresses held children's hands. Everything looked rough and practical compared to the fancy world she had left behind. Eva took a deep breath. She was Eleanor Hartford now. A school teacher from Chicago coming to marry a rancher. She had practiced this role for months. Now she had to live it. She gathered her small trunk and stepped onto the platform. The Wyoming sun was bright and hot. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, but drier. There was dust everywhere, stirred, up by horses and wagons. Eva looked around nervously. She had never seen Thomas McKenna in person. They had exchanged photographs, but the pictures were small and unclear. She was supposed to look for a tall man with brown hair and a beard. Miss Hartford? Eva turned. A man was walking toward her. He was exactly as he had described himself in his letters. Tall and broad-shouldered with work-roughened hands. His brown hair was neat under his hat. His beard was trimmed close. His clothes were clean but clearly made for ranch work, not fashion. Mr. McKenna? Eva said softly. Thomas smiled. It was a shy smile, but warm and genuine. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Wyoming. They stood looking at each other for a moment. Eva felt a flutter of surprise. Thomas was more handsome than his photograph had shown. His eyes were kind and intelligent. But more than that, he seemed solid and dependable. After years of dealing with wealthy men who were often cruel or selfish, Thomas's simple honesty was refreshing. Was the journey very difficult? Thomas asked. He reached for her trunk. Not too bad, Eva said, though I am glad to be off the train. Thomas loaded her trunk into a wagon hitched to 2 horses. The wagon was well built, but plain. Everything about Thomas seemed practical and unpretentious. I thought we could stay in town tonight, Thomas said as he helped Eva onto the wagon seat. There is a nice hotel here. We can be married tomorrow if that suits you. Then we can head out to the ranch. Eva's heart jumped. Married tomorrow. This was really happening. She was about to become the wife of a man she had never met in person. Before today. That sounds fine, she managed to say. As they drove through Cheyenne, Thomas pointed out different buildings. The bank where he did business. The general store where they could buy supplies. The church where the traveling preacher held services once a month. It is not much compared to Chicago, Thomas said. But it is growing. More people come every year. Eva looked around. Cheyenne was bigger than she had expected, but still small, compared to Chicago. The buildings were mostly wood, built quickly and simply. There were saloons and gambling halls mixed in with shops and offices. It had the rough energy of a frontier town. It seems very lively, Eva said carefully. Thomas laughed. That is a polite way to put it. It can get pretty wild, especially when the cowboys come to town. But most folks are good people just trying to make a living. They stopped at the Inter-Ocean Hotel. It was the nicest building Eva had seen in Cheyenne so far. 3 stories tall, with a proper lobby and dining room. I will get you a room, Thomas said. I will stay at the boarding house down the street. It would not be proper for us to stay in the same place before we are married. Eva felt a wave of relief. Thomas was a gentleman. In her experience with men, this was not something she could take for granted. The hotel room was small, but clean. Eva sat on the bed and looked around. Tomorrow she would be married. The day after that, she would be living on a ranch 20 miles from town. Her new life was about to begin for real. That evening, Thomas took Eva to dinner at the hotel restaurant. They sat across from each other at a small table with a white tablecloth. Eva felt nervous and awkward. She had to remember to be Eleanor, not Eva. Tell me about your teaching, Thomas said. What subjects did you teach? Eva had practiced this story many times. I taught at a small school on the west side of Chicago, mostly reading and arithmetic for children aged 6 to 12. Some geography and history for the older ones. You must miss the children, Thomas said. I do, Eva said. This was not entirely a lie. She had always liked children, though she had rarely been around them in her real life. But I am looking forward to a different kind of life. Thomas smiled. I hope you will not find ranch life too lonely. It is very quiet compared to the city. I think I will like the quiet, Eva said. Chicago was always so noisy and crowded. They talked through dinner about practical things. Thomas explained how the ranch worked. He had hired hands who helped with the cattle. Eva would be expected to help with cooking and other household tasks. There was a vegetable garden that needed tending, chickens that laid eggs for food and income. I hope you are not expecting luxury, Thomas said honestly. The cabin is comfortable but simple. We have to work hard for everything we have. I understand, Eva said. I am not afraid of hard work. Thomas looked relieved. Some ladies from back east have trouble adjusting to frontier life, but you seem different, more practical. Eva felt a stab of guilt. If only he knew how impractical her real life had been, how she had spent years doing nothing but looking pretty and entertaining men. After dinner, Thomas walked Eva back to her hotel room. They stood outside her door, both feeling awkward. Tomorrow is our wedding day, Thomas said softly. Yes, Eva whispered. I want you to know, Thomas said. I will try to be a good husband to you. I know this arrangement is unusual, marrying someone you barely know. But I believe we can build something good together. Eva looked into his honest eyes and felt terrible about deceiving him. I believe that too, she said. Thomas tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Hartford. Sleep well. Good night, Eva said. Inside her room, Eva sat by the window and looked out at the dark street. A few cowboys were riding past, whooping and hollering. In the distance, she could hear music from the saloons. This was her last night as Eleanor, Hartford, unmarried schoolteacher. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Thomas McKenna. Eva thought about the wedding. It would be simple, just her and Thomas and the preacher. No fancy dress or big celebration. Nothing like the wedding she had dreamed of as a young girl. But maybe that was better. Maybe simple was what she needed. A chance to start over with an honest man who would treat her with respect. Eva tried not to think about what would happen if Thomas ever learned the truth about her past. She had to believe that Eleanor could become real, that she could leave Eva Hartwell behind forever and truly become the woman Thomas thought he was marrying. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Eva put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim. She had bought it specifically for this day. It was the kind of dress a schoolteacher might wear to her wedding. Thomas arrived at the hotel wearing his best suit. It was clearly not expensive, but it was clean and pressed. He had trimmed his beard and combed his hair carefully. "You look beautiful," he said when he saw Eva. Eva felt herself blush. When was the last time a man had called her beautiful and meant it as a compliment, rather than an assessment of her market value? They walked to the church together. The preacher was a thin man named Reverend Williams, who traveled between several frontier towns. He performed the ceremony in the small wooden church with only the hotel owner and his wife as witnesses. The ceremony was brief, but solemn. Eva promised to love, honor, and obey Thomas McKenna. Thomas promised to love, cherish, and protect Eleanor, Hartford McKenna. When the preacher told Thomas to kiss his bride, Eva felt a shock of surprise. Thomas's kiss was gentle and respectful. After the ceremony, Thomas helped Eva into the wagon for the ride to the ranch. They were married now. There was no going back. As they drove away from Cheyenne, Eva felt both excited and terrified. The land stretched out endlessly in all directions. Rolling hills covered with grass, mountains visible in the distance. It was beautiful but also intimidating in its vastness. "What do you think?" Thomas asked, watching her face. "It is bigger than I imagined," Eva said honestly. "Wait until you see the ranch," Thomas said proudly. "I think you will like it." Eva hoped he was right. She hoped she could learn to love this big, empty land the way Thomas did. Most of all, she hoped she could learn to be the wife he deserved, without him ever discovering that Eleanor Hartford was not real. The McKenna ranch appeared in the distance as they topped a small hill. Eva saw a log cabin with a stone chimney sitting in a valley beside a creek. There were several other buildings scattered around. A barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the hills in all directions. "There it is," Thomas said with pride in his voice. "Home." Eva studied the scene. It was bigger than she had expected, but also more isolated. She could not see another building anywhere. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, Thomas had told her. For someone used to the constant noise and activity of Chicago, the silence felt overwhelming. The cabin was solidly built with thick logs. Thomas had chinked the gaps with mud and grass to keep out the wind. The roof was made of wooden shingles. A wide porch ran across the front with 2 wooden chairs. "I built it myself," Thomas said as he helped Eva down from the wagon. "It has 3 rooms. A main room with the kitchen and fireplace, a bedroom, and a small room I use for an office and storage." Inside, the cabin was clean and practical. The wide main room had a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs and shelves along one wall. The kitchen area had a wood-burning stove, a sink with a hand pump, and cupboards for dishes and food. "The pump brings water up from the creek," Thomas explained. "It is good, clean water, better than what most folks in town have." The bedroom held a large bed with a wooden frame, a dresser, and a washstand. Everything was made of plain wood but built to last. There were no decorations except for one small mirror and a photograph of an older couple on the dresser. "My parents," Thomas said when he saw Eva looking at the photograph. "They still live in Ohio." Eva nodded. She wondered what Thomas's parents would think of their son's mail-order bride. Would they approve of Eleanor? Would they be able to tell that she was not what she seemed? "I know it is not fancy," Thomas said, watching Eva's face carefully. It is sturdy and warm. We can add to it as we need to. It is very nice, Eva said honestly. The cabin was simple but comfortable. After years of living in rented rooms, the idea of having a real home felt wonderful. That first evening, Thomas showed Eva around the ranch. He introduced her to his two hired hands, Joe and Miguel. Both men were polite but shy around her. They, clearly, were not used to having a woman on the ranch. Joe has been with me for 2 years, Thomas said. Miguel joined us last spring. They are good workers and decent men. Eva learned that Joe and Miguel lived in the bunkhouse. They ate their meals there too, cooking for themselves. Eva would only be responsible for feeding herself and Thomas. I am not much of a cook, Thomas admitted. I can make coffee and fry bacon and eggs, but that gets old after a while. Eva felt a moment of panic. Eleanor was supposed to be a good cook. But Eva's cooking experience was limited. At Madame Claire's, meals were prepared by servants. Before that, she had only learned basic cooking from her mother. I will do my best, Eva said, though I may need some practice to get used to cooking on a wood stove. We will figure it out together, Thomas said kindly. The next few weeks were a learning experience for both of them. Eva had to adapt to ranch life, and Thomas had to learn to live with a wife. Eva's hands, soft from her previous life, quickly developed blisters from ranch work. She learned to split kindling for the stove, carry water from the pump, and tend the chickens. The chickens scared her at first. They seemed aggressive and unpredictable, but she gradually learned to gather eggs without getting pecked. Cooking was her biggest challenge. The wood stove was different from anything she had used before. It took skill to keep the fire at the right temperature. Eva burned several meals before she started to get the hang of it. Thomas was patient with her mistakes. When she burned the cornbread, he just smiled and said, "Well, at least we know the stove is hot enough." When she put too much salt in the stew, he ate it anyway without complaining. "You are learning fast," he told her. "Most city folks take longer to adjust to country life." Eva felt guilty about his praise. She was learning, but not as quickly as a real school teacher probably would have. She had to work twice as hard to convince Thomas that Eleanor was competent and capable. Gradually, Eva began to find a rhythm. She woke up early to start the fire and put coffee on to boil. She learned to make simple meals that Thomas enjoyed. Eggs and bacon for breakfast, soup and bread for dinner, meat and vegetables for supper. Thomas taught her about the ranch work. She learned to recognize the different cattle brands and understand how the herd was managed. She watched Thomas and his men drive cattle from one pasture to another, following the grass and water. The cattle mostly take care of themselves, Thomas explained, but we have to watch for predators and disease, and we have to make sure they have enough grass and water. Eva found the work satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. At the end of each day, she could see what she had accomplished. Clean clothes hanging on the line, a hot meal on the table, eggs collected from the chickens. It was simple work, but it felt real and worthwhile. More importantly, Eva began to genuinely care for Thomas. He was nothing like the men she had known in Chicago. He was honest and hardworking. He treated her with respect and kindness. He never raised his voice or made unreasonable demands. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Thomas told her stories about his life in Wyoming, how he had come west after the war looking for a fresh start, how he had slowly built up his herd and improved his land. Eva told him carefully constructed stories about Eleanor's life, teaching school in Chicago, living with her aunt, the children she had taught. She had to be careful not to contradict anything she had written in her letters. "Do you miss it?" Thomas asked one evening. "Teaching, I mean," Eva thought carefully. "Sometimes I miss the children, but I like this life better. It feels more honest somehow." This was true, though not in the way Thomas understood it. For the first time in years, Eva was living honestly. She was working for what she had instead of trading on her appearance and charm. As autumn approached, Eva felt more settled. The work was becoming easier. Her hands had toughened up. She could cook decent meals without burning them. She had learned to preserve vegetables from the garden and prepare for winter. Thomas seemed happy too. He smiled more often. He hummed while he worked. At night, he would read aloud from newspapers or books while Eva mended clothes or knitted. "I never knew how lonely I was until you came," he told her one night. "Having someone to talk to makes everything better." Eva felt her heart warm at his words, but she also felt the weight of her deception. Thomas was falling in love with Eleanor, a woman who did not really exist. What would happen when he found out the truth? Eva tried not to think about it. She focused on being the best wife she could be. She worked hard to learn everything Thomas could teach her about ranch life. She tried to become the woman he thought he had married. Sometimes late at night, Eva would lie awake listening to Thomas breathe beside her. He slept peacefully, trusting and content. Eva wondered if she would ever feel that secure. Would she ever be able to stop looking over her shoulder, waiting for her past to catch up with her? But during the day, working beside Thomas, Eva almost forgot about her old life. The woman who had lived at Madame Claire's felt like someone else entirely. A character in a story she had read once but could barely remember. Maybe that was how it would be. Maybe Eleanor could become real simply by living Eleanor's life day after day. Maybe the past would fade away like a bad dream, leaving only the present and the future. As winter approached, Eva felt hopeful. She had survived her first months as a ranch wife. She had learned to cook and clean and manage a household. Most importantly, she had learned to love her husband even if he did not know who she really was. Thomas began making preparations for the long Wyoming winter. He and his men brought the cattle closer to the ranch buildings. They stocked up on food and supplies. They cut extra firewood and banked it around the cabin to help keep out the cold. "This will be your first frontier winter," Thomas told Eva. "It can be hard. We might not get to town for weeks at a time if the snow is bad." Eva felt a little nervous about being so isolated, but she also felt excited. Winter would be a test of how well she had adapted to this new life. If she could survive a Wyoming winter, she could survive anything. "I am not worried," she told Thomas. "We have everything we need." Thomas smiled and put his arm around her. "Yes," he said. "We do." Summer came to the McKenna Ranch with warm sunshine and green grass. Eva had been married to Thomas for almost a year now. She felt like a different person from the woman who had stepped off the train in Cheyenne. Her hands were rough from work. Her skin was tanned from the sun. Her body was stronger from all the physical labor. More importantly, Eva felt like she truly belonged here. She could milk the cows without thinking about it. She could cook a good meal on the wood stove. She knew when storms were coming by watching the sky. This life felt real in a way her old life never had. Thomas had been talking about expanding the ranch. He wanted to buy more cattle and hire another hand. Business was good. The railroad made it easier to get cattle to market. There was money to be made in the cattle business. "I think we should build a bigger house too," Thomas said, one evening as they sat on the porch. "Maybe add a parlor and another bedroom." Eva felt a warm glow at his words. Thomas was thinking about the future, about their future together. He talked sometimes about children they might have, a family to fill the bigger house. Eva tried not to think about whether she deserved this happiness. She focused on the present, on being the best wife she could be to Thomas. Then one hot day in August, everything changed. Thomas rode in from town with news that a cattle buyer was coming to look at their herd. This was important business. If the buyer liked what he saw, Thomas could sell a large number of cattle at a good price. "His name is Samuel Morrison," Thomas told Eva. "He represents a big meatpacking company in Chicago. If we can make a deal with him, it could set us up for years." Eva felt a small chill at the mention of Chicago, but she pushed the feeling away. Chicago was a big city. The chances that this cattle buyer would have any connection to her old life were very small. 2 days later, Samuel Morrison arrived at the ranch. He was a well-dressed man in his 40s, with a gold watch chain and expensive boots. He rode in a fancy buggy instead of on horseback like most visitors to the ranch. Eva was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard voices outside. Through the window, she could see Thomas talking to a stranger. The man looked familiar, but Eva could not place him at first. Then the stranger turned toward the house and Eva's blood turned to ice. Samuel Morrison was a face from her past. He had been a regular client at Madame Claire's establishment. Wealthy businessman who came to Chicago several times a year. Eva remembered him clearly. He had been one of her best customers, always requesting her specifically when he was in town. Eva's hands started shaking. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady herself. Morrison had not seen her yet. Maybe she could avoid him. Maybe he would finish his business with Thomas and leave without ever coming inside. But even as she thought this, Eva heard Thomas calling her name. Eleanor. Come meet Mr. Morrison. Eva's heart pounded. She had no choice. She smoothed her simple dress and tried to calm her face. Maybe Morrison would not recognize her. She looked very different now. Simpler clothes, no makeup, her hair pulled back plainly, and it had been over a year since she had seen him. Eva walked outside trying to look like the ranch wife she had become. Thomas stood beside Morrison near the buggy. Mr. Morrison, this is my wife, Eleanor, Thomas said proudly. Morrison looked at Eva casually at first. Then his expression changed. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her face. Eva could see recognition dawning in his features. How do you do, Mrs. McKenna? Morrison said slowly. His voice was polite, but there was something underneath it that made Eva's skin crawl. Pleased to meet you, Eva said quietly. She kept her eyes down, hoping to discourage further conversation. Eleanor is from Chicago originally, Thomas said, not noticing the tension. She was a schoolteacher there before we married. Chicago, Morrison repeated. What a coincidence. I spent quite a bit of time in Chicago on business. What part of the city are you from, Mrs. McKenna? Eva felt trapped. The West Side, she said shortly. Ah, Morrison said. I am more familiar with the downtown area myself, near the lake. Eva knew exactly what part of downtown Morrison meant. The area where Madame Claire's establishment was located, where wealthy men went for entertainment they could not find at home. Well, Thomas said, oblivious to the undercurrents. Let me show you the cattle, Mr. Morrison. Eleanor, could you prepare some coffee for when we get back? Of course, Eva said gratefully. Anything to get away from Morrison's knowing stare. The men walked toward the pasture. Eva rushed back into the house. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely light the stove. After all this time, after everything she had built here, her past had found her. Eva tried to tell herself that Morrison might not be completely sure. A year was a long time. She looked very different. Maybe he was just suspicious, not certain. But deep down, Eva knew better. Morrison had recognized her. She could see it in his eyes. The question was what he planned to do about it. For the next 2 hours, Eva waited in agony. She made coffee and prepared a simple meal, but she could barely concentrate. Every few minutes she looked out the window to see if the men were returning. Finally, she heard their voices approaching the house. Thomas sounded pleased and excited. Morrison's voice was more reserved but friendly enough. The cattle look excellent, Morrison was saying as they walked up to the porch. I think we can work out a very good deal. They came inside and sat at the kitchen table. Eva served coffee and slices of apple pie. She tried to act normal, but she could feel Morrison watching her every move. This is delicious pie, Mrs. McKenna, Morrison said. You are quite the cook. Thank you, Eva murmured. It is amazing how different life is out here compared to the city, Morrison continued. I imagine you find it quite a change from your teaching job. Yes, Eva said, but I like it here. I am sure you do, Morrison said. There was something in his tone that made Thomas look at him curiously. The conversation continued for another hour as the men discussed cattle prices and delivery schedules. Eva cleaned up around them, trying to stay busy and avoid Morrison's gaze. Finally, business was concluded. Morrison would buy 50 head of cattle at a very good price. It was exactly the kind of deal Thomas had been hoping for. "This calls for a celebration," Thomas said happily. "Eleanor, would you mind getting that bottle of whiskey from the cupboard?" Eva poured drinks for the men. As she set Morrison's glass in front of him, he caught her wrist gently. "You have very soft hands for a ranch wife," he said quietly. "So?" Only she could hear. Eva jerked her hand away and stepped back. Thomas did not notice the exchange. He was too excited about the cattle deal. Morrison finished his drink and prepared to leave. "It has been a pleasure doing business with you, Thomas," he said, "and meeting your lovely wife." He looked directly at Eva. "I hope we will have a chance to talk more next time I am in the area." After Morrison left, Thomas was in high spirits. "That went better than I hoped," he said. "Morrison is willing to pay top dollar and he wants to do business with us regularly." Eva forced herself to smile and share his excitement, but inside, she felt sick with fear. Morrison knew who she was, and he would be back. That night, Eva lay awake long after Thomas fell asleep. She stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do. Should she tell Thomas the truth before Morrison had a chance to reveal it? Should she run away and disappear before Morrison returned? But where could she go? She had no money of her own, no family to take her in, and more importantly, she did not want to leave. This ranch, this life with Thomas had become everything to her. Eva thought about the past year, the happiness she had found here, the love she felt for Thomas, and the love he felt for Eleanor. All of it was built on a lie, but it felt more real than anything else in her life. Maybe Morrison would keep her secret. Maybe he would be satisfied with knowing he had power over her. Some men were like that. They enjoyed having secrets. They could hold over people. But Eva knew she was fooling herself. Men like Morrison did not keep secrets for free. Sooner or later, he would want something in return for his silence. And Eva did not want to think about what that might be. As dawn broke over the Wyoming hills, Eva was still awake. She watched the sun rise through the bedroom window and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. The life she had built with Thomas was in danger. The past she thought she had left behind was threatening to destroy everything she cared about. But Eva was not the same weak, desperate woman who had answered Thomas's advertisement 2 years ago. She had become stronger living on the ranch. She had learned to fight for what she wanted. And what she wanted was to stay here with Thomas, no matter what it cost. Eva got up quietly and started the fire in the kitchen stove. She had to think of a plan. She had to find a way to protect the life she had built, even if it meant facing her past head-on. Morrison thought he had power over her because he knew her secret. But Eva knew things about Morrison too. She remembered his visits to Madame Claire's. She knew what kind of man he really was behind his respectable businessman facade. If Morrison wanted to play games with her, Eva would be ready. She had too much to lose to give up without a fight. 3 weeks passed without any word from Samuel Morrison. Eva began to hope that maybe he would keep her secret after all. Maybe he had decided it was not worth the trouble to expose her. But Eva's hope was false. Morrison was simply waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity came when Thomas had to go to Denver on business. A bank there wanted to discuss a loan for expanding the ranch. It was a 3-day trip by train. Thomas did not want to leave Eva alone, but the meeting was too important to miss. "Joe and Miguel will be here," Thomas told Eva, "and Mrs. Patterson said she would check on you." Mrs. Patterson was their closest neighbor, an elderly widow who lived 15 miles away. She was a kind woman who had befriended Eva during their occasional visits to town. "I will be fine," Eva assured Thomas. "It is only 3 days." But on the second day after Thomas left, Samuel Morrison arrived at the ranch. Eva was hanging laundry on the line when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up and felt her heart sink. Morrison rode up to the house alone without his usual fancy buggy. "Good afternoon, Mrs. McKenna," Morrison said as he dismounted. "Is your husband at home?" "He is away on business," Eva said carefully. "He will not be back for 2 days." Morrison smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. How convenient. That gives us time to have a proper conversation. Ava felt afraid, but she tried not to show it. I was just finishing my chores. Would you like some coffee? That would be nice, Morrison said. It was a long ride from town. They went into the house. Ava's hands shook slightly as she poured coffee from the pot on the stove. Morrison sat at the kitchen table and watched her every move. You have done well for yourself, Morrison said casually. This is quite a change from Madame Claire's establishment. Ava set his coffee cup down hard. Some of it sloshed onto the table. I do not know what you mean. Morrison laughed. Come now, Eva. There is no need to pretend. I know exactly who you are. Hearing her real name spoken aloud in this kitchen felt like a slap. Eva sat down across from Morrison with her own coffee cup. Her hands were steady now. If this confrontation was going to happen, she would face it with courage. What do you want? Eva asked directly. Now that is more like it, Morrison said. Straight to business. I always liked that about you. Morrison leaned back in his chair. I want you to understand your situation. You have built quite a nice life. Here, your husband seems to adore you. The whole town thinks you are a respectable schoolteacher from Chicago. Get to the point, Eva said. The point is that one word from me could destroy all of this, Morrison said. How do you think your husband would react if he knew his beloved Eleanor was actually one of the most expensive prostitutes in Chicago? Eva flinched at the crude word, but she did not look away from Morrison's face. What do you want? She repeated. Morrison smiled again. For now, nothing. I am simply here to remind you that I know your secret. That gives me a certain influence over you. And if I refuse to acknowledge this influence? Eva asked. Then I tell your husband the truth, Morrison said simply. I describe Eva Hartwell in great detail. I tell him about the silk dresses and the expensive jewelry, about the wealthy men who paid handsomely for your company. Eva felt sick, but she forced herself to think clearly. If you do that, you lose your power over me. Once the secret is out, you have nothing left to threaten me with. Morrison nodded approvingly. Very good, you always were intelligent. You are right, of course, which is why I will not reveal your secret unless you force me to. Then what do you want from me? Morrison stood up and walked around the kitchen, looking at Eva's simple possessions. I might want favors from time to time. Small things. Information about your husband's business dealings. Perhaps hospitality when I am in the area. Eva understood what he meant by hospitality. Her stomach turned at the thought. I am not that woman anymore, Eva said firmly. Are you not? Morrison asked. Or are you just playing a new role? You were very good at playing roles, as I recall. Morrison walked back to the table and leaned down close to Eva. She could smell his cologne and whiskey on his breath. Think carefully about your answer, Morrison said quietly. You have a great deal to lose. Before Eva could respond, they heard horses approaching outside. Morrison straightened up and looked out the window. Your ranch hands are coming, he said. We will continue this conversation another time. Joe and Miguel rode up to the house just as Morrison was mounting his horse. They nodded politely to the stranger but looked concerned when they saw Eva's pale face. Everything all right, Mrs. McKenna? Joe asked. Fine, Eva said quickly. Mr. Morrison was just asking about buying more cattle. Morrison tipped his hat. Good day, gentlemen. Mrs. McKenna. I will be in touch about those cattle we discussed. After Morrison rode away, Joe lingered near the house. You sure you are all right? You look upset. Eva managed a weak smile. I am just tired. It has been a long day. That night, Eva could not sleep. She sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea and tried to figure out what to do. Morrison would be back. Next time, he would expect an answer to his demands, Eva thought, about running away. She could take the train back to Chicago or maybe go to California, but that would mean leaving Thomas and the life she had built here. It would mean going back to being alone and desperate. She thought about telling Thomas the truth herself before Morrison could reveal it. But how could she explain 2 years of lies? How could she make Thomas understand why she had deceived him? Eva remembered the day they were married, the hope in Thomas's eyes as he promised to love and cherish Eleanor Hartford. Eleanor was the woman he had fallen in love with through letters and conversations. Eleanor was who he thought he had married. But Eleanor was not real. Eleanor was a creation, a character Eva had invented to escape her past. If Eva told Thomas the truth, would he be able to love Eva Hartwell the way he loved Eleanor? The more Eva thought about it, the more hopeless her situation seemed. Morrison held all the power. He could destroy her marriage and her new life whenever he chose. And there was nothing she could do to stop him. But as the night wore on, Eva's despair began to turn to anger. Morrison thought he could control her because he knew her secret. But Eva knew secrets about Morrison too. She remembered things about his visits to Madame Claire's that he would not want his business associates to know. Morrison was married, Eva recalled. He had mentioned his wife several times during his visits to Chicago. He always said he had to get home to her after his business trips. How would Mrs. Morrison react if she learned about her husband's activities in Chicago? Eva felt a spark of hope. Maybe she was not as powerless as Morrison thought. Maybe it was time to remind him that secrets could work both ways. When Thomas returned from Denver 3 days later, Eva was waiting for him on the porch. She ran to meet him as he climbed down from the wagon. "I missed you," she said, throwing her arms around him. Thomas held her tight. "I missed you too. Did everything go well while I was gone?" Eva hesitated for just a moment. "Yes," she said. "Everything was fine." That night, as they lay in bed, Thomas told Eva about his trip to Denver. The bank had agreed to the loan. They could buy more cattle and expand the ranch just as they had planned. "This is going to be a good year for us," Thomas said happily. "Maybe we can start on that bigger house I mentioned." Eva snuggled closer to Thomas. "I would like that," she said. But even as she spoke, Eva wondered if there would be a future to plan for. Morrison was still out there, waiting to strike. Her past was still threatening to destroy everything she cared about. Eva closed her eyes and tried to find the courage she would need for the battle ahead. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her once before. She had found love and happiness against all odds. She was not going to let Samuel Morrison take that away from her without a fight. For 2 weeks after Thomas returned from Denver, Eva waited for Morrison to make his next move. Every day she expected to see him riding up to the ranch. Every knock at the door made her heart race. But Morrison did not come. Instead, something worse happened. Joe came back from town with news that made Eva's blood run cold. "There is a man in Cheyenne asking questions about you, Mrs. McKenna," Joe said as he sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. "Fellow named Morrison says he knew you back in Chicago." Eva felt the room spin around her. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing bad," Joe said quickly. "Just asking about how long you have been here, what kind of wife you are to Thomas. Folks told him you are well liked and respected." Thomas looked puzzled. "Morrison is the cattle buyer who was here a few weeks ago. Why would he be asking about Eleanor?" Eva's mouth went dry. She could not think of any good reason Morrison would be investigating her unless he was planning something terrible. "Maybe he is just curious," she managed to say. "Some city folks find ranch life interesting." But Thomas was not satisfied with this explanation. "It seems strange to me. Why would a businessman care about my wife's reputation?" That evening, Thomas rode into town to find out more. Eva begged him not to go, but she could not explain why without revealing everything. "I will be back tomorrow," Thomas promised. "I just want to understand what Morrison is up to." Eva spent the night in agony. She paced the floor and tried to prepare herself for the worst. By morning, she had made a decision. She could not let Thomas discover the truth from Morrison. If her secret was going to be revealed, it had to come from her. Thomas returned the next afternoon with a grim expression. Eva knew immediately that something was very wrong. "We need to talk," Thomas said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table where they had shared so many peaceful meals. Thomas looked at Eva with confusion and hurt in his eyes. Morrison told me some disturbing things, Thomas said slowly. He claims you are not who you say you are. He says your name is not Eleanor Hartford, and you were never a schoolteacher. Eva felt her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. What else did he tell you? He said you worked at a place in Chicago called Madame Claire's, he said. Thomas stopped and swallowed hard. He said you were a prostitute. The word hung in the air between them like a curse. Eva saw the pain in Thomas's eyes and wanted to die. Is it true? Thomas asked in a whisper. Eva looked at her husband's honest face and knew she could not lie anymore. The truth was going to destroy everything, but she owed him that much. Yes, she said simply. Thomas closed his eyes as if she had struck him. When he opened them again, there were tears there. Your real name? He asked. Eva Hartwell, she said. And the schoolteacher story? All lies. Thomas stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a long time with his back to Eva. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of pain. 2 years, he said. 2 years of marriage built on lies. Not all lies, Eva said desperately. My feelings for you are real. My love for this life, for this ranch, for you. That is all real. Thomas turned around. How can I believe anything you say now? How do I know what is real and what is just another performance? Eva had no answer for that. She had been performing the role of Eleanor for so long that sometimes she forgot where the performance ended and her real feelings began. Why? Thomas asked. Why did you lie to me? What were you running from that was so bad you had to create an entirely new person? Eva told him everything. About her family losing their money, about her parents dying, about having nowhere to go and no way to support herself, about ending up at Madame Claire's because it was better than starving on the streets. I was not a bad person, Eva said through her tears. I was just desperate. And when I saw your advertisement, I saw a chance to start over, to become someone better. Thomas listened without interrupting. When Eva finished her story, he sat back down at the table. I understand why you did what you did, he said quietly. But I do not understand why you kept lying, even after we were married, even after you knew I cared for you. I was afraid, Eva admitted. I was afraid you would throw me out if you knew the truth. So instead, you let me fall in love with someone who does not exist, Thomas said bitterly. Eva felt like her heart was breaking. Eleanor does exist. She is who I became when I came here. She is who I want to be. But she is not who you are, Thomas said. They sat in silence for several minutes. Eva could hear the clock ticking on the wall and the wind outside, normal ranch sounds that now seemed to belong to a different world. What happens now? Eva asked finally. Thomas shook his head. I do not know. I need time to think. I need to figure out who you really are and whether I can trust you. Morrison will want something in return for keeping this secret, Eva said. He has been threatening me. Thomas looked surprised. What kind of threats? Eva told him about Morrison's visit and his demands. Thomas's face grew dark with anger. That bastard, Thomas said. He is trying to blackmail you. I was going to fight him, Eva said. I know things about him too. But now that you know the truth, maybe it does not matter anymore. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he stood up. I am going to the bunkhouse tonight, he said. I need space to think about all of this. Eva nodded. She had expected as much. Will you want me to leave? Thomas looked at her with tired eyes. I do not know, he said honestly. I do not know anything right now. After Thomas left, Eva sat alone in the kitchen. The house felt empty and cold even though the fire was still burning in the stove. She thought about packing her things and leaving before Thomas could throw her out. It might be easier for both of them. But where would she go? She had no money and no family. And more importantly, she did not want to leave. This ranch had become her home. Thomas had become her heart, even if he could never forgive her. She loved him. Eva spent the night cleaning the house from top to bottom. She scrubbed floors and washed windows and organized cupboards. She needed to stay busy, or she would go crazy thinking about what Thomas was deciding. The next morning, Thomas came back to the house for breakfast. They ate in silence. Eva could not tell from his face what he was thinking. After breakfast, Thomas went out to work with the cattle. Eva went about her usual chores, but everything felt different. She did not know if this was her last day as Mrs. Thomas McKenna, or if there was still hope for their marriage. That evening, Thomas came back to the house. Eva had prepared his favorite meal, but neither of them ate very much. "I have been thinking," Thomas said finally, "about us, about what you told me." Eva held her breath. "I am angry," Thomas continued. "I feel betrayed and hurt, but I also understand why you did what you did, and I cannot ignore the woman you have become since you came here." Eva dared to hope. "The Eva who works beside me every day, who takes care of our home, who worries about the cattle and the weather. That woman is real," Thomas said. "I can see her. I know her. That woman is who I want to be," Eva said softly. Thomas nodded. "I believe that. But I do not know if I can trust you again. Trust is something that builds slowly, and you broke ours completely." "I understand," Eva said. "I am not asking you to leave," Thomas said. "But I am not saying everything is forgiven, either. We need to start over, get to know each other as we really are, not as we pretended to be." Eva felt a surge of gratitude and relief. It was not forgiveness, but it was a chance to rebuild what they had lost. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Thomas said. "This is going to be hard, for both of us." Eva nodded. She knew he was right. But she also knew that she would do whatever it took to earn back his trust. She had found love and a home with Thomas McKenna. She was not going to lose them without fighting for them with everything she had. The months that followed were the hardest of Eva's life. Thomas kept his word about not asking her to leave, but their marriage felt broken. They lived in the same house and worked the same ranch, but there was a wall between them that seemed impossible to cross. Thomas was polite but distant. He said good morning and good night. He thanked her for meals and asked about practical matters. But the easy conversations they used to have were gone. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her had disappeared. Eva threw herself into ranch, work with desperate energy. She got up before dawn to start breakfast and the day's chores. She worked until late in the evening, mending clothes and preparing for the next day. She hoped that if she could prove her dedication to their life together, Thomas might begin to trust her again. The first test came when Samuel Morrison returned to the ranch in October. Eva saw him riding up the path and felt her old fear return. But this time, Thomas was with her. "Stay inside," Thomas told Eva firmly. "I will handle Morrison." Eva watched from the kitchen window as Thomas met Morrison in the yard. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see that Thomas was angry. After a few minutes, Morrison climbed back on his horse and rode away quickly. Thomas came into the house with a satisfied expression. "What did you tell him?" Eva asked. "I told him that if he ever comes near my wife again, I will spread word to every rancher from here to Texas about his business practices," Thomas said. "Morrison has been cheating cattlemen for years. He thinks nobody notices, but we talk to each other." Eva felt a wave of relief. "So he will leave us alone?" "He will, if he is smart," Thomas said. "Men like Morrison are cowards. They only pick on people they think cannot fight back." It was the first time since learning the truth that Thomas had called Eva his wife without bitterness in his voice. Eva dared to hope that maybe they were making progress. Winter came early that year. By November, snow covered the ground and the temperature dropped below freezing most days. Eva and Thomas were forced to spend more time together inside the house. Slowly, carefully, they began to talk again. At first, their conversations were about practical things: the cattle, the weather, supplies they needed from town. But gradually, Thomas began asking Eva about her real past, not the made-up stories about Eleanor, But the truth about Eva Hartwell. Tell me about your parents, Thomas said one evening, as they sat by the fire. Eva told him about her father's store and how proud he had been of his business, about her mother's flower garden and the way she sang while she worked, about the family they had been before everything fell apart. They sound like good people, Thomas said. They were, Eva said. They would be ashamed of what I became after they died. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe they would understand that you did what you had to do to survive. These conversations were painful, but also healing. For the first time in years, Eva was able to talk honestly about her life. She did not have to pretend or make up stories. She could just be herself. Thomas told her more about his own past, too. About fighting in the war and seeing terrible things. About coming west to escape those memories and build something new. I guess we both came to Wyoming to start over, Thomas said one night. Yes, Eva agreed. We just went about it differently. As winter dragged on, Eva and Thomas slowly began to rebuild their relationship. But it was different from before. Instead of the easy romance of their early marriage, this was something more difficult and more real. Thomas tested Eva in small ways. He would ask her opinion about ranch decisions and see if her advice was good. He would leave her alone with money or valuable items to see if she could be trusted. Eva understood what he was doing and tried to prove herself worthy of his faith. The real turning point came in February. Eva had been feeling sick for several weeks. At first, she thought it was just the stress of their troubled marriage. But when she continued to feel nauseated in the mornings, she began to suspect something else. Eva was pregnant. She waited another week to be sure before telling Thomas. They were eating breakfast when she finally found the courage to speak. Thomas, she said quietly, I think I am going to have a baby. Thomas set down his coffee cup and stared at her. For a moment, Eva could not tell if he was happy or upset. Are you certain? He asked. As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile Eva had seen from him in months. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Eva felt tears in her eyes. Are you happy about it? Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her gently since learning the truth about her past. Yes, he said. I am happy about it. The baby changed everything between them. Thomas became protective and tender toward Eva in a way he had not been since the early days of their marriage. He insisted she rest more and avoid heavy work. He talked about the future again, about the kind of father he wanted to be and the kind of life he wanted to give their child. This baby will have a better start than either of us did, Thomas said one evening, as he rubbed Eva's growing belly. He will grow up with two parents who love each other and love him. How do you know it will be a boy? Eva asked, smiling. I do not, Thomas admitted. But boy or girl, this child will know they are wanted and loved. Spring arrived with new hope. Eva's pregnancy was progressing well, and Thomas had become attentive and caring again. Not quite the same as before, but in some ways better. Their relationship now was built on truth instead of lies. One warm day in April, Mrs. Patterson came to visit. She was the elderly widow who lived 15 miles away and had become Eva's closest friend among the ranch wives. Mrs. Patterson had sharp eyes and a kind heart. She had suspected for months that something was troubling the McKenna marriage. You look much better, dear, Mrs. Patterson said as she and Eva sat on the porch drinking tea. Earlier this winter you seemed very unhappy. Eva hesitated. She had never told anyone the truth about her past. But Mrs. Patterson had been nothing but kind to her, and Eva felt the need to confide in another woman. Thomas and I went through a difficult time, Eva said carefully. We had some problems to work through. Mrs. Patterson nodded. Most marriages do at some point. The secret is whether both people are willing to do the work to fix them. Mrs. Patterson? Eva said suddenly. What would you say if you found out that someone you knew was not who they claimed to be? The older woman looked at Eva thoughtfully. I would say that we are all more than our worst mistakes, and that people can change if they truly want to. Ava felt tears in her eyes. Even if those mistakes were very bad, especially then, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. The Lord forgives, and we should too, especially those we love. That evening, Eva told Thomas about her conversation with Mrs. Patterson. To her surprise, Thomas smiled. Mrs. Patterson is a wise woman, he said. She has seen a lot of life. Maybe we should listen to her advice. Does that mean you forgive me? Eva asked hesitantly. Thomas took her hands in his. I forgave you months ago, he said. I was just too stubborn and hurt to admit it. They held each other for a long time that night. For the first time since the truth came out, Ava felt like they were truly husband and wife again. Their son was born in September, during the golden days of autumn. Eva labored for 12 hours with Mrs. Patterson and the doctor from town helping her. When Thomas first held his son, Eva saw tears in his eyes. He is perfect, Thomas whispered. What should we name him? Ava had been thinking about this for months. What about James, after your father? Thomas smiled. James McKenna, I like that. As Ava watched Thomas hold their baby, she thought about how far they had both come. Thomas had learned to forgive and trust again. Ava had learned to live honestly and openly. 2 years later, Ava sat on the porch of their new house. Thomas had built it bigger, just as he had promised. It had a proper parlor and 3 bedrooms, one for them, one for James, and one for the baby girl who was due in the spring. Eva was writing in a journal that Thomas had given her for Christmas. She wrote about ranch life and the changing seasons, about watching James take his first steps and say his first words, about the peace she had found in this big empty land that had seemed so frightening when she first arrived. Today she was writing about the past and how it had shaped who she became. Not Eva Hartwell, the desperate woman who had sold herself to survive. Not Eleanor Hartford, the fictional schoolteacher who had never really existed, but Eva McKenna, the ranch wife and mother who had found her true self in Wyoming. The past cannot be changed, Eva wrote, but it does not have to define us forever. We can choose who we want to become. We can choose to be better than our worst moments. Thomas came up behind her and read over her shoulder. That is very wise, he said, kissing the top of her head. Mrs. Patterson would say I learned it from her, Eva said, leaning back against her husband. No, Thomas said. You learned it from living through hard times and coming out stronger. That takes courage. Eva closed her journal and looked out at the vast Wyoming landscape. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. James played in the yard with a wooden horse Thomas had carved for him. This was her life now.